On March 8, 1944, at 14,000 feet above Brunswick, Germany, Oberleutnant Wilhelm Hoffmann steadied his Messerschmitt Bf 109 and peered through his gun sight at the American fighter climbing ahead of him. It looked absurd, huge, barrel-shaped, clumsy. Too big to be dangerous. Too heavy to be a real fighter. Just like the jokes back at the mess hall. A flying milk bottle. A bathtub with wings. Hoffmann squeezed the trigger. His cannons hammered, orange flashes rippling along the American's fuselage. Shells sparked across aluminum skin. The enemy fighter didn't explode. It didn't even slow. Instead, it rolled inverted and pitched straight down. Hoffmann shoved his stick forward and followed. The airspeed needle climbed rapidly. 350 miles per hour. 400. 450. His aircraft began to tremble. Control forces stiffened. At 470, the vibrations turned violent. Hoffmann had no choice. He eased back, pulling out of the dive before the wings tore free. The American didn't. The P-47 Thunderbolt vanished into the cloud deck below, accelerating past 500 miles per hour as if gravity itself favored it. Because it did. For 3 years, German pilots had mocked American fighter design while flying sleek, lightweight interceptors honed for elegance and maneuverability. The Thunderbolt violated every principle they believed in. It weighed nearly 7 tons empty, twice the mass of a Bf 109. Its engine alone weighed more than some entire German airframes. To German eyes, it wasn't a fighter. It was a mistake. Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian-born engineer who designed it, knew otherwise. When intelligence officers briefed Major Hans-Joachim Philipp, commander of Jägerschwader 1, on the new American fighter in early 1943, he laughed openly at the reconnaissance photos. Twice the size of a Spitfire. 13,000 pounds loaded. A 2,000 horsepower engine just to keep it airborne. Philipp had over 200 victories to his name. He knew fighters. This thing, he decided, would die easily. The British weren't impressed either when the first Thunderbolts arrived in England with the 56th Fighter Group. Pilots accustomed to Spitfires stared at the massive aircraft with disbelief. Captain Walker, Bud, Mahurin remembered climbing into one for the first time and feeling as though he'd traded a sports car for a dump truck. The cockpit sat so high a ladder was required. When the engine started, the ground itself seemed to shake. That engine, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, was unlike anything the Germans believed could be mass-produced. 18 cylinders in 2 rows, producing 2,000 horsepower in early models, climbing to 2,300 and beyond. Each cylinder the size of a coffee can. The entire assembly weighed more than 2,000 pounds. German engineers dismissed the numbers as propaganda. By late 1943, Republic Aviation was producing Thunderbolts at a rate of nearly 1 per hour. The mathematics of war were shifting. German pilots encountered the P-47 in combat for the first time in the spring of 1943. Oberleutnant Heinz Koch of JG-11 wrote in his diary after one such encounter that the American fighters appeared enormous, visible from miles away, flying straight and level like bombers. The Luftwaffe prepared to destroy them using standard tactics, high-altitude dives, slashing attacks, then zoom climbs back to safety. It didn't work. As German fighters dove, the Thunderbolts simply pushed their noses down and accelerated away. Koch recorded seeing his airspeed indicator climb past 480 miles per hour while the American continued to pull ahead, disappearing as if released from gravity's grip. The secret lay in the very mass they mocked. Kartveli had designed the P-47 around altitude and momentum. The enormous engine fed a turbo-supercharger driven by exhaust gases, compressing intake air to maintain full power where German engines gasped for breath. At 25,000 feet, the Thunderbolt had more usable horsepower than a Bf 109 had at sea level. Above 30,000, it ruled. Mass became velocity. Velocity became survival. Lieutenant Robert Johnson learned just how much punishment the Thunderbolt could absorb on June 26, 1943, over France. Separated from his formation, he was attacked by Oberleutnant Egon Mayer, one of Germany's top aces. Cannon shells shattered Johnson's canopy. Instruments vanished in sparks. Fuel leaked. Smoke streamed from the engine. Mayer poured fire into the American fighter at point-blank range, convinced it would disintegrate. It didn't. Johnson later counted over 200 holes in his aircraft, some large enough to crawl through. The engine kept running. The airframe held. Mayer eventually saluted and broke off, unable to believe what he was seeing. Johnson limped home and landed. 3 weeks later, the same Thunderbolt flew again. German doctrine had been shaped by wars fought below 15,000 feet, where lightness and agility ruled. Their superchargers were optimized for medium altitude. Above 20,000, German fighters struggled to breathe. The P-47 thrived. Luftwaffe leadership misjudged it completely. General Adolf Galland approved tactics that encouraged horizontal maneuvering combat, assuming the heavy American fighter would bleed energy and fall behind. What German planners failed to understand was that the Thunderbolt's massive wing area gave it surprisingly low wing loading, especially at altitude. Combined with full engine power where German engines faltered, the P-47 could turn better than expected, sometimes better than its opponents. Captain Fred Christensen proved it in July 1943 over Holland. When German fighters committed to a dive, Christensen hauled back on the stick at 24,000 feet, pulling 6 gs. The Thunderbolt held the turn. The Bf-109 behind him stalled, its engine starving for power. Christensen rolled in behind it and fired a 3-second burst. 8 50 caliber machine guns spoke at once. The Germans had mocked the Thunderbolt's armament too. No cannon, only machine guns. They didn't understand American logic. Each Browning fired around the size of a man's thumb at nearly 3,000 feet per second. 8 guns produced a storm of lead, 100 rounds per second. With thousands of rounds on board, a Thunderbolt could fire again and again while German pilots counted every shell. By the time German armorers examined a crashed P-47 in late 1943, disbelief replaced laughter. The fighter wasn't elegant. It was unstoppable. By late 1943, German pilots were no longer laughing. They were counting. Oberfeldwebel Hans Rossbach, a Luftwaffe armorer, examined the wreckage of a downed P-47 and stared at the ammunition bays in disbelief. His Bf-109 carried barely enough shells for a minute of combat. The American fighter carried 4 times that, thousands of rounds feeding 8 guns that never seemed to stop firing. German pilots had to make every shot count. Thunderbolt pilots could miss 20 times and keep attacking. Behind every engagement was an equation Germany could not solve. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant covered millions of square feet and ran 3 shifts without pause. By October 1943, it was producing hundreds of Thunderbolts every month. Pratt & Whitney factories turned out 60 double Wasp engines per day. General Electric delivered turbo superchargers by the dozens. Each a precision-built miracle of metallurgy Germany could not replicate at scale. While German squadrons counted serviceable fighters in the dozens, American planners launched missions in the hundreds. The breaking point came in January 1944. Operation Argument, Big Week, was designed to force the Luftwaffe into the air and destroy it. Thousands of bombers struck German aircraft factories, while swarms of P-47s flew escort from altitudes German fighters could not reach. The Luftwaffe had no choice but to rise and fight. In 6 days, Germany lost 355 pilots, experienced men who took years to train. The Americans lost 28 Thunderbolt pilots. The imbalance was fatal. German ace Franz Stigler later described the experience with bitter clarity. The Thunderbolts waited above 30,000 feet, invisible until they struck. When German fighters dove for the bombers, the P-47s fell on them from above like hammers. They could not be outrun. They could not be outclimbed. Diving away only made things worse. German fighters, built light for agility, began shedding wings when pulling out of high-speed dives. The Thunderbolt's massive structure absorbed stresses that tore others apart. Republic Aviation had tested dives German engineers believed impossible. Dives so fast that controls stiffened, airframes buffeted, and compressibility effects appeared. The P-47 survived. The data was built into every production aircraft. Thunderbolt pilots adapted their tactics accordingly. Colonel Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group abandoned traditional dogfighting doctrine. His pilots fought vertically, not horizontally. They used altitude as a weapon. Dive, fire, climb back to safety where the enemy could not follow. Below 20,000 feet, German fighters might compete. Above it, the sky belonged to the Thunderbolt. The results were devastating. The 56th Fighter Group became the highest-scoring American fighter unit in Europe. Hundreds of confirmed kills. Losses measured in dozens. German intelligence struggled to understand how such an ungainly aircraft was dismantling their finest squadrons. Germany tried to respond. They fielded improved Bf-109 variants with methanol water injection. It helped briefly, below 20,000 feet. They rushed the Tu-152, a high-altitude interceptor that could finally challenge the P-47 where it lived. Only 43 were built before Allied bombing destroyed the factories. Jets appeared too late, too few, too fragile. Meanwhile, Thunderbolts multiplied. By mid-1944, P-47s no longer merely escorted bombers. They hunted. They flew far ahead of formations, breaking up German attacks before they formed. They roamed freely at altitude, dominating airspace through presence alone. And when the front moved to the ground, the Thunderbolt revealed its second nature. Each aircraft could carry bombs, rockets, and still bring 8 machine guns to bear. Heavily armored, it absorbed ground fire that shredded lighter fighters. German troops gave it a new name, Hollenhund, Hellhound. They learned to hide under trees. The Thunderbolts blew the trees apart. They moved at night. The Thunderbolts dropped flares. There was no escape. By late 1944, German pilot replacement had collapsed. Veterans were killed faster than they could be trained. New pilots arrived with a fraction of the hours American pilots logged before combat. When they tried to dive away from Thunderbolts, their wings failed. When they tried to climb, their engines choked. The hunter had become prey. One German officer summarized it best after being asked what he needed to defeat the Americans. "I need P-47s, Reichsmarschall." The joke ended careers, but not the truth. By January 1945, the Luftwaffe existed mostly on paper. Perhaps 1,000 fighters remained across all fronts. In Western Europe alone, the Allies fielded over 10,000 fighters, 3,000 of them Thunderbolts. When Germany launched its final offensive on New Year's Day, hoping to destroy Allied aircraft on the ground, the P-47s were already airborne. They struck from above. Hundreds of German aircraft were destroyed in hours. Experienced pilots died in numbers Germany could not replace. The Thunderbolt groups lost aircraft too, but replacements arrived within days. Engines, ammunition, pilots, entire aircraft appeared as if conjured. Major Johannes Steinhoff later described the reality with brutal honesty. Germany repaired aircraft with scavenged parts. America replaced them whole. German pilots rationed ammunition. American pilots fired as if supply were infinite. It was no longer a contest between men. It was a contest between systems. The P-47 didn't merely destroy aircraft. It destroyed knowledge. Every veteran pilot killed took years of experience with him. Every training school bombed erased a generation. Every fuel depot burned grounded fighters before they could fly. By war's end, Thunderbolts had flown over 400,000 sorties. They destroyed enemy aircraft, trains, vehicles, airfields, and infrastructure on a scale no German planner had imagined possible. More importantly, they brought most of their pilots home. After the war, German aces finally spoke plainly. They had mocked the Thunderbolt's size, its weight, its appearance. They mistook strength for clumsiness, mass for inefficiency. They never understood that America wasn't building fighters. It was building systems designed for sustained war. The P-47 wasn't beautiful. It was relentless. It embodied the mathematics of industrial warfare. Altitude multiplied by power, multiplied by durability, multiplied by numbers. Where Germany crafted precision instruments, America built sledgehammers and produced them by the thousands. The laughter faded by the summer of 1944. By then, the sound of double Wasp engines had become the soundtrack of defeat. The 7-ton milk bottle crushed the Luftwaffe not through elegance, but inevitability. In war, beauty doesn't matter. Victory does. By January 1945, the Luftwaffe existed mostly on paper. Perhaps 1,000 fighters remained operational across all fronts. In Western Europe alone, the Allies fielded more than 10,000 fighters, 3,000 of them P-47 Thunderbolts. The imbalance was no longer strategic. It was terminal. When Germany launched its final gamble on New Year's Day, 1945, Operation Bodenplatte, the goal was simple: destroy Allied air power on the ground. Hundreds of German fighters crossed the lines at dawn, hoping to catch enemy aircraft parked wingtip to wingtip. The Thunderbolts were already airborne. They fell on the attackers from above, their preferred position. In hours, more than 200 Luftwaffe aircraft were destroyed, along with irreplaceable veteran pilots. The P-47 groups suffered losses too, but replacements arrived within days. New aircraft, new engines, new pilots. The system absorbed damage and kept moving. German commanders finally understood what they were facing. Major Johannes Steinhoff, one of the Luftwaffe's senior leaders, later described the difference with bitter clarity. German units hoarded ammunition. American pilots fired as if supply were infinite. German mechanics repaired shattered aircraft with scavenged parts. Americans replaced entire machines. When a Thunderbolt was damaged beyond use, it was pushed aside and another rolled into its place before sunset. This was no longer a contest between pilots. It was a contest between industrial systems. And Germany was fighting artisans against an assembly line. The P-47 didn't just destroy aircraft. It shattered institutional memory. When experienced German pilots were shot down, their hard-earned knowledge vanished with them. When Thunderbolts bombed airfields and fuel depots, training flights stopped. When rockets tore through rail yards, replacement aircraft never arrived. Attrition compounded monthly. By early 1945, many German fighters were flown by teenagers with fewer than 50 hours in type. American pilots arrived in Europe with more flight time than most Luftwaffe instructors, and had fired more ammunition in training than German pilots would fire in combat. The Thunderbolt dominated the sky above 20,000 feet. Below it, it ruled the battlefield. As a fighter bomber, the P-47 became a blunt instrument of destruction. Heavily armored, it absorbed ground fire that would disintegrate lighter aircraft. 50 caliber machine guns shredded vehicles, trains, and troop columns. Bombs and rockets followed. German soldiers gave it a new name, Hollenhund, Hellhound, because once it appeared overhead, there was nowhere to hide. They hid under trees. The Thunderbolts blew the trees apart. They moved at night. The Thunderbolts dropped flares. They stopped moving altogether. The Thunderbolts hunted anyway. By the war's final months, the Luftwaffe could no longer protect its own airspace. Thunderbolts ranged freely, escorting bombers, hunting fighters, smashing infrastructure, and supporting ground troops in a single day. After the war, surviving German aces finally spoke plainly. They had laughed at the Thunderbolt's size, its weight, its appearance. They mistook mass for clumsiness, strength for inefficiency. They never understood that America wasn't building a beautiful fighter. It was building a system designed to survive, adapt, and overwhelm. The P-47 was not elegant. It was inevitable. It represented the mathematics of industrial warfare made metal. Altitude multiplied by power, multiplied by durability, multiplied by numbers. Where Germany refined perfection in small quantities, America produced good enough machines in unstoppable volume. By the summer of 1944, no one was laughing anymore. The sound of double Wasp engines became the soundtrack of defeat. The 7-ton milk bottle crushed the Luftwaffe not through finesse, but certainty. In war, beauty doesn't matter. Victory does.